Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone. Namaste. Welcome to Pure Presence Book Club and the study of the nature of consciousness, uh, authored by Rupert Spira. And we're very grateful we're still doing this together, all of us. And we're very grateful to have the material by Rupert Spira to delve into and really contemplate on our own time before the show, and then really just kind of, toss it around, look at it, kind of look at the different insights that each of us have about this particular chapter. This is chapter 13. And I want to welcome our guest back, Jenny Beal. Thank you for joining us again, Jenny.
Hello, Bill. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. And I so appreciate you, and I so appreciate all of our guest hosts for bringing forth this material and your flavor of it, your experience of this material in the different ways that it expresses itself as you. I think it's invaluable. I know that the ones that are following us that are with us live right now. Really appreciate this setup of having co-hosts on the show. I've enjoyed it very much, and the dialogue has been fresh. It's been exciting. It's been inspirational, and even the ones that write to me, the emails to me that watch the replays have said how much they appreciate having this venue to be able to just digest the material of Rupert's book, and it's so rich. And I sent an email out to all of you this morning, inviting you I gave you the correct links for re-registration for this book study group, and also I gave you another link for the call-in feature. We have people that are coming into the call-in feature right now. And if you guys that are calling in or joining us by your computer via the call-in feature, and you would like to raise your hand and ask a question of myself or Jenny, or make your own comment about the content of this chapter, chapter 13, there are no states of consciousness. Just press star 2 on your device, and your hand will go up. And at a point where it's appropriate to unmute your mic, I'll invite you in, and you can come in and talk with all of us at the same time. And I want to mention that next week we're going to have the chapter 14 is going to be the Wordsworth and the Longing for God with Andrea Fraze. She'll be our guest host next week. And then the following week will be on the 20th, Tuesday the 20th, not the 21st as it was originally scheduled, because for chapter 15. And Kimberly Cartwright will be our guest host back for that chapter, the shared medium of mind. And because we're flying to San Francisco, my wife and I are presenters at the Course in Miracles conference out there. Kimberly's going to join us out there in San Francisco. So we're going to do the show a day early on the 20th. And I think that's it for announcements. I want to get into the material of this week's chapter. And there are no states of consciousness. And when I first read the title of this chapter, I'm going, there are no states of consciousness. Wow, that's an interesting title for this chapter. I need to get in and see what this is all about. And I'm very happy to have Jenny Beal with us this week, because in my mind, she's I jokingly call you the group librarian, but I really feel that you are the one that is the closest to the uh, to the terms of this understanding the content and the writing of Rupert. You understand him so well, and you kind of have this, you know, like a librarian would know, you know where to get. Oh yeah, in this YouTube he said this, or at this meeting he said this. You're just amazing, and I'm very grateful to have you on the show, and welcome.
It's
It's
lovely to
lovely
be
to
here,
be here,
Bill.
Bill.
Um, and my reaction to the ideas in this chapter when I first heard them was so similar to yours. It's lovely. Because, as you know, I came to the direct path from a progressive path, and the aim of that path was to get one to a higher level of consciousness. So to discover from Rupert that no such higher level of consciousness exists was pretty revolutionary for me,
Yes.
and it required quite a change in the way I saw mind, body, and world, and of course consciousness itself.
Mm.
So I wanted to read a bit from the first page because it really summarizes what the whole of this chapter is about.
Good. Thank you.
And he says, "It is only from the point of view of a finite mind, which believes that it possesses its own independent existence, that a self is believed to move through three states. From the point of view of consciousness, there is no separate individual self or ego that could transition through any states. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are temporary modulations of consciousness, which is never inherently changed by any of the states it assumes." And then on the next page, he describes um, the state in which consciousness is most awake to its own reality like this. He says, consciousness is knowledge of its own indivisible, infinite being, which shines in the finite mind as the experience of being aware. In other words, it's, as he says later on, it's not to wake up as a body in a world, it's to wake up as consciousness, knowing its own infinite, indivisible reality alone.
Mm.
And
Yes.
that it was that was really such a revolution, because that that consciousness's knowledge of its own indivisible being is present, or can be present, is potentially present in all of the states of mind, if we can call them that, through sleeping, dreaming, and waking. He says a bit later on that it's through waking that it becomes apparent first, but then later through sleeping and dreaming.
Hmm.
And he says that we think of the waking state as being the most real, and the dream state as being the most illusory, and then deep sleep being kind of a blank, nothing at all, really. But in this chapter, he describes those three states very, very differently, and he he uses the image of a camera lens, which really refers back to the last chapter, the focusing of consciousness, and he describes the waking state as being the most focused position of the lens, where everything is, all the objects of experience are in really tight, well-defined focus. And the laws and the patterns that govern all the experience that we have in that state are, again, very, very precise, for the most part. And we're thinking of the scientific laws, and how we expect things to behave. But
Hmm.
then if you go into the dream state, then that's where the focus widens, and so there's more of consciousness's infinite potential becomes available to us, and that's really interesting, because I used to think of the dream state as being a sort of useless state that you didn't really want, but it's not like that at all, and I think it's quite interesting, the way he refers later on in the chapter, to ideas from Jung's philosophy. So things like archetypes, they can come into the dream state, um, and it's a beautiful idea. It's a sort of widening of consciousness, the collective unconscious, also another idea from Jung.
Yeah.
And then in deep sleep, the camera lens is completely defocused. So there's no objects at all to be experienced, but it's it's actually full of of itself. It's full of consciousness, and that's very beautiful. There's there's one of the trickiest of the Upanishads, but I think for me one of the most beautiful is the Mandukya Upanishad, which really describes how you're closer to the absolute, to your true being, in deep sleep, than you are in the waking state.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, it
it's
was
very
that
lovely.
was what you just said was a big surprise to me to read that I am more conscious, less dense in the dreaming state than I am in this state of presence and awareness, and that was a surprise to me because I'm thinking, well, this is the state of mind that is is awakening. This is a state of mind that is more conscious. And I was very surprised to read those same terms that Rupert introduced, but I was also, when he explains it, that there's more limitation in this modulation of consciousness. There's more restrictions or more limitations. That's that's so totally true to the dream state because I mean, I've lucid dreamed before, as I mentioned last week, and Andrea also mentioned her experience in dreaming. And sometimes I have superpowers in those dreams.
Yeah.
And it's because the limits are relaxed. There's no finite the finite limits of time and space and gravity and all the things, all the laws, the constructs of this denser experience are relaxed, and so we can do things that we can't seem to do in the physical experience.
Yes, it's amazing to think that that's not something that we should shun, that's bad. It's something that's absolutely okay. And it was very interesting at the last retreat. There was an artist, and I think maybe Annika would be interested in this, who was really saying how could she get in touch, with all of these things that are on the periphery of the waking state. She felt contact, from ancestors, from people who had died, and she wanted to bring that into her art. And what was the best way of doing that? And Rupert said just to practice meditation, to be aware of being aware, because that is loosening the focus of the lens. It's widening it out, and then all of those things may become available to her. So I was really interested in that.
Yes. Yes. Well, and also what you just mentioned a minute ago in the last paragraph on page 120, what is that the true waking state, that is the state in which consciousness is most awake to its own reality, is consciousness's knowledge of its own indivisible, infinite being, which shines in the infinite, which shines in the finite mind as the experience of being aware, and which thought conceptualizes as I or I am. And when I read that, when I read that the first time, and when I read that again, I am blown away by what that statement is saying. That statement right there is inviting me to understand that in the experience of being aware, in and we all have this available right now. It's not something that we become a sage to understand, and we have to go to India, or we have to follow some guru, or we have we have the ability, we can have that understanding can bring us to the knowledge of our own being right now, in this instant, in this moment. And we can experience this as the way that we live all the time. This can be our experience.
Yes, yes. And it's not something requiring any complicated techniques either. It's something that's very simple that we can all practice. So, simply to ask yourself the question, "Am I aware?" and then just rest in the place that the mind takes you to. It's so simple.
It's available. What I love about it is that, and what I love about Rupert's the way he articulates it, the way he puts it on paper, he makes it understandable at a very simple way of understanding. He makes it available to me and to all of the beings. I mean, you may have to read some of what he says a few times to get to really to get it, but once you come into the understanding of how simple it is, it's like, can it be that simple? Can it be that easy to just, when you answer the question, am I aware? And to realize that you are as close to consciousness as you can get when the mind relaxes into the answer of that statement, or into the answer of that question.
Yes, yeah. So Rupert goes on later in the chapter to explain how, as we spend more and more time in standing as awareness, being knowingly aware of our true nature as pure consciousness, then that sort of infiltrates everything else in our life. It infiltrates first of all the waking state, and that's um, it works. It works. I've seen it. It's works for me, and it works for many of my friends too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I in this chapter of the consciousness is not a state. There are no states of consciousness, and then to come into the experience of connecting with that idea, it's as easy as just pausing and then being just being. And in the meditation of that, and I also love uh, Rupert's description, his definition and his description of meditation is the best I've ever heard. And it actually does agree with this experience of just being. Being is meditation. It is the experience of awareness being aware of itself. Really, that's about as close as I can get to his description. I mean, without going into his words, it's awareness. Being aware of itself is a constant. It's like we're in constant communication with the being, with the I of awareness, or the place of consciousness that is the the realm where nothing, like the screen that Rupert describes, where it's a changeless, eternal, I'm trying to find words for it, presence.
Mhm.
And it's just so refreshing to have such a simple portal into the nature of what I am, not as Bill, but as the knowing experience of the self, or of consciousness.
Mhm. And one of the big benefits is that you can do this anytime, all the time. You don't need to sit down, on a meditation cushion in a quiet room. It's applicable in any circumstances, in the midst of experience, as well as when you do want to sit down and rest. Um,
Yes, yes.
and well, one of the things that I do is, particularly before I go to sleep and when I wake up, I have a particular way of using this, and it really actually came from uh, of a deep inquiry into all of these states, because it was it was so shocking to me when I first heard this. I felt I needed to really look at them all for myself. So um, having looked at the waking state and meditation there, then I turned my attention to um, dreams. And so what I did then, and what I still do because I love it, is before I go to sleep, I'm lying down in bed, and I just ask the question, "Am I aware?" And I allow all the thoughts, all the sensations of the body, any sounds that there might be, just to disappear, and just dissolve into sleep that way. And it was Rupert who suggested that, actually, because I had asked him in a meeting in Oxford about something I read in Atmananda Krishna Menon, which was sleep knowingly. It was an instruction to sleep knowingly, that the sleep of uh, uh, the ordinary man just takes you to sort of blankness. The sleep um, of of someone who practices mantra meditation will take you to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but the sleep of someone who sleeps knowingly takes you right to your true nature.
Mm.
And um, those are the. So I asked him, well, how do I do that? And so that was the advice he gave me, just to be aware of being aware, and let everything, all experience, just
Mm.
melt away.
And you do
And
that at before you go to bed, and you also
no,
do it.
I do it when I'm lying down in bed, and it's a way of just going to sleep. So
Hmm.
I go to sleep like that, and then when I wake up, I use a method from Jean Klein, which Rupert also recommends, which is that when you wake up, there's a moment when you're not aware of being a body in a world. Um, there's just pure awareness, and you just stay there. And if the body seems to come back, then I use the yoga meditation techniques to dissolve it out again. So again, I'm just lying in bed, practicing that, and then when it feels stable, and I'm feeling I am pure awareness. I'm not a body in a world. Then I get up, and
Nice.
it's lovely. It works really nicely.
Very nice. I love it. I love it. And actually, David Spector says on the chat, sleep knowingly is good advice, but it is not a prescription of something to do. It is the natural result of a fully functioning nervous system. Well, in my mind, it is a prescription. I think of it as a prescription of a way to
It's a not doing it. That I mean,
true.
being aware, and everything that Rupert says
Yes, yes,
is not doing,
yes,
but it's a suggestion, and it's suggestion that you allow
yes,
your mind to adopt,
yes,
and
yes.
that's really how it is. Mm.
Well, and I really appreciate your sharing that with us because I feel that it is an important treatment to give ourselves, not to just how many times have we just gone to bed, and then we have we have no there's no preparation, there's no intention, there's nothing to just go to sleep, and so you have dreams, and there's nothing really intentional in consciousness that is or in the waking state that is leading us into uh, I guess a more intentional state of mind for the sleeping state so that we're because like it how many I don't know about you, but when I used to watch television, I used to go to sleep with the television on. Well, what's that doing to
I know.
to to my sleeping state, right?
Mm,
But
mm.
if I'm intentional in putting the mind in the care of awareness, of just being present, of so that anything that is being remembered, any of the finite thoughts that are in my consciousness, if I'm moving myself into the state of being and being present, well, the sleeping state will carry me into a much more gentle, much more loving, much more a sweeter experience of the sleeping hours. And then I absolutely love, and I'm going to use your prescription for getting up in the morning because I usually, I look at the clock. I like to get up before the sun comes up so I can sit and just be in quiet meditation, just be present. I keep the lights very low, and I just sit and I just practice presence and awareness and that quiet meditation when I wake up in the morning. But I almost never do what you said you do before you get out of bed. And come into the knowing experience of awareness before I put my feet on the floor. I'm doing that. That's going to be tomorrow morning for me.
I certainly recommend it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what Rupert says about these states of mind really being a spectrum. They're they're not discrete, separate states, and that was something that when I was doing all that exploration of the different states, that was something I looked into. And what was completely amazing, Bill, was that I never used to remember dreams, and I never used to be aware of coming out of sleep. But somehow, once I had that feeling that I needed to look into those states, it started to happen, and I felt it much more as a spectrum. So and it's continued, not all the time, but most of the time it continues. When I wake up, I wake up very, very gradually, and it's not always easy to know whether it's a dream or whether it's not a dream. In fact, it that's just a label, and I don't even try to apply labels now. And it's that knowing that throughout all of those, all I am, all I really am, and all that's really there, is consciousness. And it's um, it's quite a strange thing, because if you practice this, I mean, it's not really a practice, but if you follow that method for a while, you get to a point where you don't really feel that you have gone into deep sleep at all. You feel me consciousness has always been there, and that's really what Atmananda Krishna meant by sleeping knowingly. And Rupert described it as, well, one time when he first got together with his wife Ellen, and they were sleeping together, and Ellen woke up in the morning and said to him, "How did you sleep?" And he said, "I didn't sleep at all." And she said, "Yeah, yes, you do. You were snoring." And and he um, he never he never felt that, and he never feels that he sleeps. And quite often I don't feel I sleep either, and I think it's the result of using that kind of method. So I'd be interested to hear whether that happens for you eventually. It was about I don't know, a couple of years before it worked like that for me, but yeah.
Okay. But so you don't sleep. In other words, consciousness stays uh, aware, and the body is just snoring. Is that what?
Well, I'm not aware of the body snoring,
Yeah,
because there's no
there's no body.
experience in deep sleep. I know I do snore because my husband says I do.
Oh, that's really interesting. I look forward to trying these methods of 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 the body sleeping, and also being not being conscious at the same time. Or these, whatever happens is going to be perfect. But it
Yes.
is an interesting idea to set an intention in not only the way that I go to bed at night, but the way I wake up in the morning.
Mm.
And I also find it very interesting that Jesus in the Course invites us to, before we go to bed at night, just to think about God, or to think about, uh, I think God or love, or something of that nature. And it's very similar, because if we,
Yes, if you replace the think about with just being, and
yeah,
just being God,
yes.
and resting as God, it's identical, isn't it?
Well, I prefer it. I prefer awareness. I prefer
Yeah, yeah.
not. I used to think of God as being outside of me,
Hmm.
or Jesus being outside of me, or love being. I used to think of all of these ideas, especially the word God. Think about God. Well, okay, I'm thinking about God. But if you are taking the this step, or if you're taking the knowing experience of being present and awareness, you are closer to even the idea that there's a God that you're thinking about, because you're only being the experience of awareness, of presence, of your natural divine nature. And so you are actually initiating a pull to go in and be in your natural state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. I love it.
Mm, mm.
There's a few comments on the board. I'm going to pick up a few of them, unless you have something else you want to share.
No, 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 you do.
So there's a lot of comments. There's more comments than I actually can that we'll be able to get to. So I'm going to grab one that David Spector wrote that said that I love. It's right here on page 122 in the book. He talks about ignorant. He says the mind is in ignorance cannot simply adopt full consciousness. It is important to recognize the limitations with which most of us start off our path. And that isn't exactly what I pulled from Rupert's paragraph, which I absolutely love. He says that the to be ignorant in this sense is not to be stupid, as the word usually implies in our culture. Rather, it refers to the state of mind in which the reality of experience is ignored. And I
Yes,
love that. I love so consciousness, in order to have this personal self experience, it requires consciousness to limit itself to ignore what it is in order to be what it's not, right?
yes, yes, absolutely. It, ignorance is not a state um, that one gets into and can't get out of. Consciousness and the knowing of our true nature is available all the time to everyone. Rupert makes that absolutely clear. So um, yeah, the waking state is a contraction, is a focusing of the mind. Um, but if, as he says a bit later on, if we get accustomed to always going back or always sinking back into um, being knowingly the presence of awareness, then the peace of it never gets forgotten. The peace of our true nature never gets forgotten, even when we're focusing on things in our daily life, which of course all of us have to do. We're not then in ignorance anymore. That it's but to get out of ignorance, very simple. Just be aware of being aware.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's such a simple practice. It's a and I say practice. I think it does require uh, a desire to experience your nature, your what you are. I think it does require, and I don't think that you. I feel that what happens naturally of its own. Once the spark of understanding brings a a glimpse or brings a taste of what we are into our experience of consciousness, and I don't mean consciousness at the higher realm, or but into a conscious state. I feel that once we get the taste of that, once we get the flavor of that, it's like getting a flavor of something that is the best tasting, sweetest honey that we've ever had. And we go, whoa, what was that? What was that? I want some more of that. And it's the light that we are that's being recognized, and it tastes so good we want some more of it. And when we want some more of it, that's I'm just sort of describing how the desire to be, or the desire to experience the self as awareness, it becomes the sweetest taste that you could ever want. And it doesn't occur in your senses. It becomes the knowing of what you are is so compelling that you want more of it.
Mm. Rupert describes desire as the pull of our true nature, the pull of love back into itself, and I think that's a beautiful description.
Yes, yes. What in the to continue with with this chapter, it says on page 125, Rupert says in the third paragraph, the waking state is, as far as we know, consciousness. This is crazy sounding, but the waking state, as far as we know, conscious is as far as we know, consciousness's most contracted or limited form or state. So this state that we're in right now, in this moment, is consciousness's most limited form or state. Does that blow your mind that we think we know something, and this is the most limited form of our nature of awareness itself?
Yes, but it makes sense though, doesn't it? Because everything is so clearly defined in the waking state compared with dreams. So it makes sense that it's more limited. Like, if you have a camera and you're taking a picture, then you want a very close, very sharp focus. If you're taking a picture of a flower, say, then it has to be very sharp and very precise. So you're contracting the lens. Um, you're reducing the aperture of the camera lens to get a really sharp, beautiful picture of a flower. And it's the same sort of thing. It's not a mistake. He describes it, I think, perhaps later on in the book um, uh, as um, as God wanting to, or God experiencing its infinite, his or her infinite potential, something like that. And it's it's just beautiful. It's described in the Hindu traditions as Leela, a play, just the play of consciousness.
Hmm.
So nothing wrong with it, but it if we do ignore our true nature, then that will lead to suffering, and that suffering becomes particularly manifest in the waking state. But it's we're always free um, to to relax the focus of our attention and go back to awareness, and it really does work. The What he says about the piece of our true nature infiltrating all our thoughts and our activities and our relationships, and to some extent even our bodily sensations. That really does work.
Yeah, yeah, and it it not only works, it brings. I mean, it's for me. I'm looking at when you say that there's no mistakes, that God didn't do something by accident or
Yeah.
do something wrong. And I've heard Rupert. In fact, I interviewed Rupert once, and he was very clear in that dialogue where he said that this was not, this is not a mistake. This Do you think God would make a mistake about and I forget exactly how he put it, but he described it in that it's not even possible for consciousness to make a mistake.
Yes.
However, when we have our suffering experience, it seems like a mistake is happening. It seems like we're off track. How can you experience the peace of God or the peace of the presence of awareness when you're like totally in chaos or you're suffering. And in that way, um, is consciousness modulating itself to the experience of suffering, or have we ignored consciousness so fully that we have decided that the suffering is our identity instead of the identity of what we really are?
Well, I don't. I think we have to take the we out of that equation, really, Bill.
Okay.
It's the way I see it is that there there are natural patterns to uh, to the way consciousness's activity works. Mind is just the activity of consciousness, as Rupert describes, and we can think of universal mind being the collection of all minds, all of the activity of consciousness. Um, and there are natural patterns to that. And one of the natural patterns that happens is ego. It does, ego arises. If we conceptualize ego as being a separate entity, then we are going to suffer. And uh, that's part of the pattern. It's almost like the laws of nature are part of the pattern, and that's a kind of law of nature. So the thing is, yes, in order to experience a world, then consciousness has to arise as an ego, a separate self in that world. But if that separate self believes itself to be a completely separate entity with its own existence, then that's going to cause suffering.
Yeah, that's the we. That's the we you were
That's the
talking
way,
about. Yeah.
yes.
And yes, and that's what it was great. Somebody said on the board, I think it was Hillary. She said King Lear and John Smith is a really suitable metaphor here. And
Yes, absolutely right, Hilla. That's
exactly, perfect.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the it's funny that it has to be the mind of King Lear that makes that that has that um, that has that idea. It has to be the mind, the one that is it's coming from the mind and it's modulating into that
I
limit.
am King Lear.
Yes,
Yes,
I am. I know that I'm King Lear, and
yeah,
why is this happening like this? Yes,
yes, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
There was also a question on the board about the library of past recordings. I have started those. I've actually didn't realize it was going to take so much time that I have to actually download them and then back upload them again, and it takes a little bit of time to do that. I have the first 5 or 6 shows up that I just need to press the publish button on to make that available. But I am working on it, and I'll publish what I have up so far today. I'll go ahead and press the publish button, and then as I add to it, you guys will have access to the rest of them. However, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel that they're up on right now, you'll have access to them all right now. You can just subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's about well, all of our previous shows are on that YouTube channel, so you can also find those there. If you're waiting, if you want to skip ahead of what I have published, you can find them on the YouTube channel. Thank you. And then David Spector says Rupert doesn't talk about setting an intention because I was talking about setting an intention when we were speaking about the dream states and getting ready to go to bed. I call it setting the intention, but let's see what David says. He says Rupert doesn't talk about setting an intention before we go to bed for a good reason. It is best to progress innocently so we don't fall into manipulation. Can we keep our discussion closer to Rupert's teachings? Well,
Well, that is, I did describe exactly what he told me in Oxford. And in fact, strangely enough, that phrase that you used, Bill, setting an intention, was one that I have discussed with Rupert in a different connection, in fact. It was when I was talking about Mixang, a method of contemplative photography. And one of the important points there is that you set an intention, but you don't go and look for something to photograph. And he very much agreed with that. So I'm happy that, that in using that phrase that we are keeping to his teaching.
yes, yes. And I agree with it also. I think and I've heard Rupert also say that, rituals are not helpful. And that could be a kind of a ritual. However, I have to say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I like the ideas that you presented here, both for going to sleep at night and for waking up in the morning. I'm going to try
It's
it.
absolutely, yeah, it's absolutely not a ritual. It's simply meditating. That is all it is, really.
Yes,
There's nothing more to it than that, and nobody can say that Rupert doesn't tell us to do that.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. And if you don't have something else that you want to add, I'm just going to stay on the chat board. Is that okay with you?
Yes,
We
do.
have
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
about 10 minutes left, and
sure.
David says we do get into a stronger habit of ignoring or overlooking our true nature. Yes, that's exactly why I use the term intention, because of what you just said. This habit is so strong that we are unable to be fully conscious during sleep or dreaming. As time goes by on this path, stresses, tendencies, condensations, vasanas are dissolved, and fully consciousness becomes available 24 hours a day. Well, yeah, I actually think that's what Rupert speaks about in his meditation piece on this chapter. He speaks about the meditation causes these things to sort of bubble up. I don't think that's Rupert's words. He uses a different term, but it sort of allows these things that these areas of old habits or the finite experience or the suffering, it causes it to sort of dissolve into the meditation experience. Yes.
Yes, yes. It's quite important the order that Rupert presents in the direct path. So we start with clear seeing of our true nature as pure consciousness. Then it's understanding um, that that is unlimited, that um, uh, never suffers, that's always peaceful. And it's only then, after that, and it's from that point that we start to dissolve the knots and the tensions and the vasanas in the body. And that's the exact opposite of the traditional paths. But he's Rupert's very clear about following that particular order.
Okay. Yes. Good. Good. And one of the things that I've noticed is that even though we're talking about it, even though we're talking about these experiences of what happens during meditation, what happens when we just meditate in awareness before going to sleep at night, or even this practice that I think you said John Klein, uh, you learn from John Klein of the the movement that occurs in the waking state, not the waking, but waking up from going to bed at night state. In my mind, the light does all the work. The awareness, the consciousness, the movement into the experience of presence, or the awareness itself, is doing all of the bringing forth all of these ideas into awareness of being conscious of these ideas, because the light is sort of pulling us into that state of being. And I want to use the word doing, but I know the word doing doesn't really fit in this language, so I'm just going to leave it right there. And Catherine Gaines has put her hand up to say something. So I don't see her on the call-in feature, so I'm going to accept her. Possibly, she might even show up here on the screen with us in a minute if she has her earbuds on and she goes through the testing. She may actually. She put her hand up to speak, so I'm just going to see if she shows up inside the room with us here in a minute. You're welcome to show up, Catherine, if this works. And anyway, so what do you think about that?
um, there was a lovely. I'm trying to remember what it was called. There was a lovely video about grace, and I remember the person asking whether enlightenment is something that is partly grace and partly what we do, and Rupert saying it's all grace, and by that he meant that we don't do anything. These all of these thoughts arise in consciousness. They arise by themselves. The fact that you and I are here now talking to each other and to everyone has just arisen. It's not something that we've done.
Yes,
Um, and I think that's great.
yes. And grace comes in my mind, and grace comes into the desire to connect with itself, with awareness, to be more aware of it, or to be aware of itself. Grace fills that desire with the experience that occurs.
Yes, yes. Mm.
That's the only. I mean, that's the way I can summarize.
Yes, yes. Mm.
Yes. And Annika said, Rupert suggests when experiencing suffering, ask awareness what it thinks about it. It doesn't think, but check with awareness.
Mm.
Yes. Well, the question itself is the bringing the illusion into the light, and the light will dispel the illusion by definition.
Yes.
Totally.
Mm. Mm.
And then Hillary seems. I haven't seen Hillary on the board. I don't remember on the board very much, but she definitely is. She follows Rupert because she's talking very clearly about the King Lear and John Smith. Uh,
I know Hilla very very well. We've been
oh,
at
you know Hillary?
many
Okay.
retreats together.
Oh, good, good. Yes, she said there is only John Smith, actually. Yeah,
Mm.
thank you for that reminder. And also, those of us that have been to his retreats remember, and also you can watch on YouTube his metaphors and his stories of there's Mary and Jane and King Lear and John Smith, and he uses these stories to help us to understand the the uh, the arrangement that's occurring in the dreaming state and
Yes.
in the awakening state, or the experience that is that we have in awareness, and the difference of the two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have a few minutes left. No, we're at the hour, aren't we? Hillary says, hi, Jenny. Bless you. And Hillary says, bless you, Bill and Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us. And Barbara says, there is no doer. Catherine, oh, and Mary Field says, Catherine, maybe write your comments here in the chat column if you cannot connect with the audio or visual. And we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for joining us this week. And thank you, Jenny, for being another co host again. I always love your input and your insights on the show. And this has been a particularly active audience on the chat board this week. Thank you guys for joining us in that way. And we didn't have any hands come up for the call in feature, but we have several people that are using the call in feature to join us. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this week. And next week, we'll have Andrea Fraze will be back with us for chapter 14, the Wordsworth and the Longing for God chapter. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you again next week. And thank you for joining us on replay for you guys that can't be with us live. And I love you all. I bless you. And I so appreciate your joining us in this way. Thank you, Jenny, for being our guest host this week.
Thank you for inviting me, Bill, and thank you everyone for joining us.
All right. Until next week, I'll see you all next week.